You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And as I do each and every week, I want to thank all of you for all your support. Because of you that our listeners are growing each and every day. So many of you are sharing our podcasts and individual shows with family, friends, and associates. So again, thank you so much for all you do. Many of you listen to the show. We've hear that you go on your walks in the morning and you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. We're on all the podcast stations, and some of you go right to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So again, I want to thank you all for your support. I know why our listeners are growing each and every day. It's because we have great guests, and I'm not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Dr. Jay Sanders, who is President and CEO of Global Telemedicine Group, Professor of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University of Medicine, and a founding board member of the American Telemedicine Association. Dr. Sanders has spent the majority of his professional career involved in teaching, patient care, and healthcare research. He has spent over 50 years in the development and implementation of telecommunications and information technologies as a means of addressing the problems relating to quality, costs, and access to care that now plague our healthcare system. Dr. Sanders was involved in the first statewide telemedicine program in the country, and in coordination with Georgia Tech, provided the first Tele-homecare technology application in the United States, named the electronic house call. So Dr. Sanders, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me, Frank. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is important stuff. So, I'm going to ask probably a very basic question. Maybe, I don't know if you get it all the time, but I guess it's something I thought about because I don't even know the answer to this one. I know the answers to some, but it's really just to help educate us on telemedicine a little bit. And is there a difference between telemedicine and telehealth? And when we talk about telemedicine or telehealth, what does that mean? Let's go to kind of the basic 101 here.
No, it's a very common question. I'm asked. We called it telemedicine initially because just physicians were involved, but I actually, under a National Science Foundation grant in 1973, utilized nurse practitioners along with telemedicine and compared them with board-certified internists not using telemedicine. It turned out after a 3-year study that we found that nurse practitioners did as well with telemedicine as the board-certified physicians did without it. So the nursing profession said, perhaps we shouldn't just call it telemedicine. Maybe we should call it telehealth and make sure that everyone is recognized in the use of the term. So that's really the only major difference. Is really no controversy. It's just an issue of inclusion.
Makes sense. So give us a history. How long has it been around? How are things different back when it started to now? Kind of get us up to date. We'll talk more, in a little bit about future, which is important, but let's bring us up to date a little bit. Give us some history.
Well, that's a bit of a time sequence. I was first introduced to it when I was a third-year medical resident at the Massachusetts General Hospital, hold on here, in 1967.
Wow.
And it was my professor of medicine, who I think I'm falsely called the father of telemedicine. It's really my professor of medicine, Dr. Kenneth Bird, who really coined the term. I'll tell you how how we got to the term telemedicine. But fundamentally, in those days, in 1967, I was running the emergency department at the Massachusetts General Hospital. The medical senior resident and the surgical senior resident each took 12-hour shifts. There was no emergency medical specialty in those days. And all of a sudden, the ER doors swung open wildly. And there, standing in the middle of the ER doors, was my professor of medicine with a red face and sweating. And he saw me and he started towards me. And I knew exactly what he was going to tell me, that he had once again gotten caught in the Boston traffic. Now, his outside office, he was the medical director at Logan Airport Medical Station. The Logan Airport Medical Station is only about 2.5 miles away from the Mass General. But there was this one tunnel under the Charles River called the Sumner Tunnel that he would have to go through, and the traffic was backed up for miles on each side of that tunnel. It used to take him an hour each way. So once again, totally frustrated with the traffic and how long it took, he had this idea while stuck under the Charles River in the tunnel, and I was the first one he got to see. And he grabbed my arm and he said, "Jay, what do you think if I buy 2 black and white TV cameras, and I put one here at the MGH and one at Logan Airport, and I began to see patients over TV? What do you think?" I have to tell you, remember, I was a resident, he was my professor. I thought it was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard. But I had enough common sense to realize the difference in our positions, and I said, "Gee, Dr. Bird, that's a very interesting idea." Well, he then went ahead, got funding from the general director of the hospital, who was equally a maverick as Dr. Bird was, Dr. John Knowles, and bought 2 black and white TV cameras. And by 1969, we had a complete telemedicine setup between the MGH-ER and Logan Airport Medical Station. And by the way, very few people ask me this, but how did it get the word telemedicine? Well, Ken said to me, "Jay, you know, we can't call this television medicine. Why don't we just call it telemedicine?"
Wow.
That's
how it started.
origin. Yeah. So I went from a complete naysayer to someone who was totally enthralled with the capability that we had. And of course, the patients loved it because they were being seen on a TV camera. So they were immediately wrapped up in this and very receptive to the technology. I then went from the Mass General to become Assistant Chief of Medicine at the University of Miami, Jackson Memorial Hospital. And in 1973, I got this NSF, National Science Foundation grant to assess and truly evaluate telemedicine.
That's fantastic. Great story. Great story. So a lot has happened since black and white TVs. All right. I mean, I happen to be part of a big group. No problem mentioning it. I don't think Kaiser. I am part of a big group in California, and I'd have to say that most of my appointments are not done in the office. Right. So really what was adopted years back by you and your professor is pretty commonplace today. I mean, is that telemedicine? I guess that's telemedicine.
That's absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely telemedicine. And one of the things that you mentioned, you're usually sitting at home being seen by your physician.
Right.
And the first actual tele-homecare technology, for good or for bad, I developed between 1993 and 1995 at the Medical College of Georgia. The reason I did that was we had developed this 59-site telemedicine system in the state of Georgia. We connected literally every hospital in the state to the academic medical centers. But one of the things that we found was that in these rural communities, patients that we had taken care of in the hospital and provided consultative expertise were being discharged. And then unfortunately, 2 to 3 weeks later, they were being readmitted to the emergency department. And it dawned on me, you know, I could avoid these ER admissions if I had seen the patient in their home a week or so before they ended up in extremis and having to be admitted to the hospital. So I came up with the idea of developing what we then called the electronic house call. And I got some funding from the federal government.
Right.
And working with Georgia Tech, we developed a system which today is commonplace, but was brand new in 1995 by taking the telemedicine through the patient's home TV. That was the only technology. There was no internet. It was
Right.
DARPANET in those days. And remember, there was only coaxial cable in the ground. There was no fiber. But the local TV company said, look, we will convert this to a two-way interactive system. I didn't know how they did it. They explained it to me. So they did it, and I said, why would you spend your money on this? They said, well, Jay, think about this. We now charge a consumer a certain amount of money for the movie channel. We can now charge them a certain amount of money for the health channel. It made all the sense in the world. It took me the first patient to see over that system to realize why the best exam room is where the patient lives, not where the doctor works. And it was a patient who was constantly being readmitted with severe asthma, needing to be intubated in the emergency department, sent off to the intensive care unit. And the minute I saw her at home, she was sitting in a great big puffy chair, which is very allergenic. She had a cat in her lap, which was the pet for the home. And her husband was watching this whole event at the kitchen door with a cigarette.
Smoking. Oh my God. Oh my
That
God. There it
changed
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't have to ask a question. You just saw it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right.
This is fascinating. So I want to, get more into the future of what you see. I mean, you got some very interesting, you got a great knowledge base and some great ideas. So I want to get into that, but we're going to take I promise, a real quick break here. And then we'll get more in kind of what you're doing and what you see in the future. So just want to take a 30-second break to recognize our sponsor. So do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then an individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we're back with Dr. Jay Sanders, who has been recognized as the father of telemedicine, right? Did I get that right? At least by your associates, right? So it's a great. This is a tremendous subject matter. So you had sent me some materials to read up on a little bit, and I appreciate that. And you made a state. Well, before we get into that, I'm going to ask, before I ask that question, maybe you could share with our listeners, anything you want to share as it relates to any research you're doing, or suggestions that you have that people could learn more about what you're doing. Anything you'd like to share at all?
Well, perhaps the most important thing I can share has nothing to do with telemedicine, has nothing to do with AI, has nothing to do with medical sensors. It has to do with personal responsibility. And I have been impressed throughout my career by the fact that so much of what we deal with in medicine could have been prevented by the patient themselves. And I think what we need to instill in individuals is much more personal responsibility. Your healthcare delivery system is not based upon a once a year physical examination by your physician. It has to be based upon what you do on a day-to-day basis. One of the ironies to me worldwide is the fact that the two major killers worldwide are in total opposite ends of the pendulum. One is starvation, and the other is obesity. And who's responsible for the obesity? It's not your physician. It's not all the technology. It's you and me making the decision as to what we're going to eat and how much we're going to eat. So I don't want to just focus on the food aspect. I want to focus on the personal responsibility aspect. But one of the good things, getting away from that negative of personal responsibility, is the fact that soon we'll have all of the technology in wearable technology that will alert us to what's right and what's wrong in terms of our own health. And then we need to take the responsibility to act upon that information.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. So it's interesting, when I was reading some of the information that you shared with me, you said that the home is going to be the exam room of the future. So talk to us more about that.
Oh, well, I probably shouldn't have left it at that way. I think what we're going to see with medical sensors and AI and the web is the capability for us to have our exam room wherever we are. Because with wearable sensors, whether they're attached, whether they're tattoos, whether they're in our belt and in our ring and in our watch, or whether they're embedded. I should point out that it's my understanding that the Mexican security service for their president actually has embedded sensors so that they pass through security. We will even at some point in time, and I hope this doesn't frighten any of the listeners, we will actually have circulating sensors. They'll be less than 7 microns, and 7 microns is the size of a red blood cell. They'll be less than that, and they'll be keeping us up to date. Now, we're not going to be getting alarms all the time. We'll only be notified when, based upon our genetic analysis, the environment that we're in, the medications we may or may not be taking, will alert us to the fact that something has gone wrong and that it needs to be addressed. So we will be our own exam rooms. And the traditional physician, and I hope none of my colleagues are listening to this, will probably not be necessary.
Very interesting. So at what point, though, so that, like you said, it's the exam room. Obviously, if somebody has to go in for surgery, that's a whole nother thing, right? But I'm going to give you something that just happened to me. All right.
Sure.
And I'm happy to share it. And maybe you could tell me, well, it's not going to be any different, Frank, tomorrow as you experienced today, or maybe it will. So I, like a lot of people in our age group, I'll say our age group, we would try to go and get exercise, and I got talked into by some friends. Hey, we start playing some pickleball, right? So I played played pickleball, and years ago, old baseball injury, I had surgery on my knee, but it hasn't been bothering me for quite some time. So I'm playing pickleball, and boom, I make a move and I twist my knee, and I was really having trouble just walking.
Yep.
Oh, what's going on? So I sent a note to the doctor. The doctor says, first step, let's just x-ray it first before we go to the next step, which is probably the right thing to do. And, I do have some things going on with the knee, but nothing that is, needs any surgery at this point. So my question is, that's what happened today. I sent a message. They sent it back. They set up, they said they called it in. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I went in, had the x-ray, turned around, came back, got the results electronically, had no discussion with any physician. And, I'm off to the races. Not races, but I got to watch myself. So how is that going to be different in the future? Or is that going to be the same in the example I just gave you?
Yeah, no, actually, the body-worn sensors would probably alert you to the fact that you're about to injure your knee. There'll be a lot more preventative capability with the sensors anticipating the injury rather than you being pushed to the point where you have the injury. The radiology exams will still probably exist, but they'll be in the form of holograms, where you'll be able to see the blood flow going through in real time. You'll be able to see the movement, not just a static picture of the joint, but you will actually be able to see it in real time, in real motion, as to what is actually happening. And many of these sensors, as I said, are potentially body worn, and you will not get to the point where you have the injury. You will be warned about the potential for getting the injury if you, in fact, continue with the way you're playing your pickleball.
Yeah. So I look at, as you know, I deal with, our company deals with seniors all the time. And I think you're an exception to this, and I think I might be as well. We're for our age, pretty technologically advanced. You've been involved in technology. But I have to say most people, our age group are not as advanced, all right? And that could be challenging sometimes. How do you see this being set up where the person on the other end, the patient, doesn't need to be technologically advanced, or will they need to be more so than they are today?
Well, there's one reality to that. You and I are not going to exist.
Right. By that time.
At a certain point. And
Okay.
If you look at our kids are much more.
That's true. Yeah.
Advanced
so that generation.
Than we are. So I don't really worry about that. But so much of the technology is going to be automatic. It will alert us immediately to what's going on. We won't have to be techno savvy with respect to this. I see, you may think this is silly, but I actually see the home builders and the ADTs and the alarm.coms, the security companies, all embedding these sensors in the new homes. That'll be part of your new home. I also see the Alexas of this world. Let me give you an example. When Amazon Care still existed, and I called the CEO of Amazon Care and I said, look, one of the things that you can do with Alexa, your AI machine, is embed the patient's electronic medical record into Alexa. Now think about the fact that Mrs. Jones at home says to Alexa, Alexa, please order X, Y, and Z food from Giant Supermarket and have it sent to my home. Now, Alexa knows that Mrs. Jones has type 2 diabetes and knows that X, Y, and Z food is not the best food for her. So what does Alexa do? Alexa says, by the way, Mrs. Jones, if you would like, we will buy you A, B, and C food from Whole Foods, which, by the way, Amazon owns.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we'll have it delivered and we'll charge you less. And interestingly enough, Mrs. Jones, we know you stand at CVS once a month to get your medicines. We'll have PillPack, which Amazon owns, send you those medications, and we will charge you less. Now, what is the biggest motivating factor for Mrs. Jones in doing the right thing? I'll charge you less, but it's a big win from a healthcare delivery standpoint for Mrs. Jones, and it's a big win economically.
It's a win-win for everybody. Sure. That's a win-win. That's fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, we didn't even get into AI and we only have a couple minutes, but, and I'm sure you could talk for a couple hours on the subject matter, but I guess we are talking about AI. I mean, how does that fit into this whole scheme of things with telemedicine?
Well, quite candidly, don't laugh. I started doing AI. I tried doing AI in 1969 also, but we just didn't have the computer power. Today we have the computer power. There's a fundamental reality that my colleagues are having a hard time dealing with, and that is that they don't know everything. And the fundamental reality is that AI can bring us everything. If AI differs from what my diagnosis is, guess what? I'm going to rely on AI, not my diagnosis, because AI is able to search the entire medical literature and codify it and bring me a conclusion that I didn't have the time to read. I didn't read that last study or the most recent study that was done. I cannot keep up to date. No physician can keep up to date. That's the good and the bad news. The good news is there's so much good new research coming out that no physician can keep up to date. That's also the bad news. AI can keep up to date,
right,
and therefore lead me down the right medical therapeutic pathway to advise my patients.
I mean, you probably know this better than anybody, but just my little dealings in the medical profession, especially the GPs out there, they're exhausted.
Exactly.
They're exhausted. I don't know how they keep up. So I think what you're saying is so true, you know, with AI.
Yeah, we just have to get rid of the, how should I put it, the ego issues. I try and tell my colleagues, look, this is our collective knowledge base. What AI does is bring collective expertise to the bedside, not just a single physician. It brings all the specialists to the bedside at once.
Yeah. Boy, I could talk to you all day, but we don't have the time right now. So Dr. Jay Sanders, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers today. We'd love to have you back. Any new things going on, which I know they're going on all the time, we'd love to love to have you back and talk more. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us on Boomers Today. We'll talk to everybody next week, and please be safe out there.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.